Hello everyone. Learning English is an exciting journey, but let's be honest, it's not always easy. Today, we're talking about the hardest parts of learning English. If you've ever struggled with pronunciation, grammar, or confidence, you're not alone.
That's right. English can be tricky, especially with things like phrasal verbs, silent letters, and words that are spelled the same but pronounced differently. 1 minute, you think you've mastered something, and the next, a new rule comes along to confuse you.
Exactly, and let's not forget about irregular verbs. Why is it go, went, gone but run, ran, run? It doesn't always make sense.
And then there's pronunciation. Why does though? Thought and tough all sound different even though they look similar. It's enough to drive anyone crazy.
And let's talk about confidence. Many learners understand English but hesitate to speak because they're afraid of making mistakes. But here's the truth: mistakes are part of the learning process.
Absolutely. The hardest part of learning English isn't just about rules or pronunciation. It's about overcoming the fear of speaking and embracing the challenge.
And speaking of confidence, one of the biggest challenges is thinking in English instead of translating from your native language. When you constantly translate in your head, it slows down your speech and makes conversations feel unnatural.
That's a great point. Native speakers don't stop to think about grammar rules when they speak. They just use the language naturally. The key is to expose yourself to English as much as possible through listening, speaking, reading, and even thinking in English.
Yes, and let's not forget phrasal verbs. Native speakers use them all the time, but they don't always make sense when you translate them directly. For example, give up means to quit, put up with means to tolerate, and run into means to meet by chance. They're not always logical.
Right, and idioms can be another headache. Expressions like raining cats and dogs or break a leg sound strange if you don't already know what they mean. That's why learning English is more than just grammar, it's about understanding
the culture and the way people actually use the language. You can learn all the grammar rules in the world, but if you don't understand how native speakers phrase things, you'll still struggle to sound natural.
Exactly, and pronunciation can be another big challenge. English spelling doesn't always match the pronunciation, so words like thought, through, and though can be really confusing.
Oh, definitely. And even words that look the same can be pronounced differently, like read past tense and read present tense. It's no wonder learners get frustrated.
That's why listening practice is so important. The more you hear English being spoken naturally, the more familiar you become with pronunciation patterns. And don't be afraid to mimic native speakers. It helps train your mouth and ears.
Great tip. Another tricky part is learning when to use formal or informal language. Textbooks often teach very polite English, but in real life, people use more casual expressions. Saying "how do you do" sounds super formal, while "hey, what's up" is more natural in everyday conversation.
And slang. If you visit an English-speaking country, you'll hear slang words that aren't taught in classrooms. In the UK, for example, cheers can mean thank you, and knackered means exhausted. If you don't know these words, conversations can be confusing.
Right, but here's the good news: every learner struggles with these things at some point. The key is to keep practicing, be patient with yourself, and most importantly, enjoy the process.
And let's not forget phrasal verbs. They can be a nightmare for learners because their meanings aren't always obvious. Give up means to quit, but give in means to surrender. Take off can mean to remove something, but it also means when a plane leaves the ground.
Oh, phrasal verbs are definitely tricky. And what makes it harder is that native speakers use them all the time, so you really can avoid them. The best way to learn them is through context, not just memorization.
That's true. And idioms are another tough one. If someone says, "It's raining cats and dogs," they don't mean actual animals are falling from the sky, it just means it's raining heavily. These expressions make English more colorful, but they can be confusing at first.
Absolutely. And then there's word stress. English words change meaning depending on where you put the stress. Like record as a noun versus record as a verb. A small change in pronunciation can change the whole meaning of a sentence.
Right. And connected speech makes things even harder. Native speakers don't pronounce every word separately. They blend words together. Instead of saying, "What do you want?" they might say, "What do you want?" That's why listening practice is so important. It helps you get used to real-life speech patterns.
Speaking of real-life speech, have you noticed how English has so many silent letters? Words like night, honest, and subtle don't sound the way they look. That's why pronunciation rules in English can be frustrating for learners.
Yeah, English spelling is wild. There's no single rule that works all the time. Think about words like rough, though, and through. They all have, but are pronounced differently.
It's crazy, but despite all these challenges, people from all over the world still manage to learn English. That just proves that it's possible. The key is to expose yourself to the language every day. Listen to music, watch movies, read books, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly. Learning English isn't about being perfect. It's about communicating. So, if you're struggling, don't worry, it's all part of the journey.
And another thing, English has so many words that mean almost the same thing, but with slight differences. Think about say, tell, speak, and talk. They all involve communication, but they're used differently. You say something, but you tell someone. You speak a language, but you talk to a friend. Small details like this can be really frustrating.
Oh, totally. And don't even get me started on prepositions. They seem so simple, but they're actually one of the hardest parts of English. You say interested in, not interested on. You say good at, not good in. There's no clear rule, you just have to learn them through practice.
And phrasal verbs make prepositions even harder. Like, look up means to search for information, but look after means to take care of someone. The preposition completely changes the meaning.
That's why English can be tricky even for people who have been learning for years. But I think one of the biggest challenges isn't just the grammar or vocabulary, it's confidence. A lot of learners understand English really well, but when they have to speak, they freeze up.
That's so true. I think it's because people are afraid of making mistakes. But honestly, making mistakes is part of learning. Even native speakers make mistakes all the time. No one speaks perfectly all the time, and that's okay.
Exactly. I always tell people don't focus on being perfect. Focus on being understood. If you say, "He go to school yesterday," people will still understand you, even though the grammar isn't perfect. The more you practice, the better you get.
And speaking of practice, one of the best ways to improve is by actually speaking. A lot of learners focus too much on reading and writing, but if you don't speak, you won't build confidence. Talking to native speakers, joining language exchange groups, or even just speaking to yourself in English can make a huge difference.
That's a great tip. And listening is just as important. A lot of learners struggle to understand native speakers because they talk fast or use slang. The best way to improve is by listening to real conversations podcasts, movies, TV shows. Even if you don't understand every word, your brain gets used to the sounds of English.
Exactly, and don't rely too much on subtitles. If you always read subtitles, your brain focuses on reading instead of listening. Try watching with English subtitles at first, then without them once you get more comfortable.
Yes, and another thing, don't be afraid to think in English. A lot of learners translate everything in their head before speaking, and that slows them down. If you train yourself to think in English, your speaking will become much faster and more natural.
That's a great point. Learning English is a journey, and everyone has their own challenges. But if you stay consistent, practice every day, and don't let mistakes stop you, you'll improve so much faster than you think.
And another thing, accents. A lot of learners stress too much about having a perfect accent. But honestly, accents are not a problem unless they make you hard to understand. Think about it, people from the UK, the Australia, and India all have different English accents, but they're still speaking English.
That's so true. And actually, having a slight accent can be a good thing. It shows that you know more than one language, which is impressive. Plus, most native speakers don't care if you have an accent as long as they understand you.
Exactly. And sometimes learners feel embarrassed about their pronunciation. But pronunciation is just a skill you can improve with practice. If you struggle with certain sounds, like th in think or r in world, just practice them more. Watch how native speakers move their mouths and try to copy them.
Yes, and shadowing is a great way to improve pronunciation. That's when you listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say immediately, trying to copy their tone and rhythm. It really helps.
Definitely. And another challenge a lot of learners have is slang and informal expressions. They might study formal English, but then when they hear native speakers talking, they don't understand half the words because of slang.
Right, like, imagine you hear someone say, "I'm knackered." If you only learn a textbook English, you might have no idea that means I'm really tired.
Exactly. Or, "It's raining cats and dogs." If you translate that literally, it sounds crazy. But it just means it's raining a lot. That's why it's good to learn real, everyday English, not just textbook phrases.
Yes, and idioms are another tricky part. Sometimes English expressions don't make logical sense, like break a leg meaning good luck. But once you start learning them, they make conversations sound way more natural.
Absolutely. And it's okay if you don't know all the slang and idioms right away. Even native speakers learn new slang words all the time. The key is to expose yourself to real English as much as possible. Listen to podcasts, watch interviews, read blogs.
And don't be afraid to ask people what something means. If you hear a new phrase, just ask, "What does that mean?" Most people will be happy to explain.
That's a great point. And one last thing, don't compare yourself to other learners. Everyone learns at their own pace. Some people are great at grammar, but struggle with speaking. Others speak fluently, but make grammar mistakes. The important thing is to keep improving.
Yes, learning English isn't about being perfect, it's about being able to communicate. So keep practicing, keep listening, and most importantly, keep enjoying the process.
And speaking of comparisons, another big mistake is thinking that you have to sound exactly like a native speaker to be considered fluent. That's just not true. There are millions of fluent English speakers around the world who have different accents, make small grammar mistakes, or use simple words, and guess what? They still communicate perfectly fine.
Absolutely. I think sometimes learners put too much pressure on themselves. They want to speak perfectly, so they get scared of making mistakes, and then they end up not speaking at all. But making mistakes is actually a good thing. It means you're learning.
Yes, mistakes help you improve. Think about how kids learn their first language. They say things wrong all the time, but no one laughs at them. Instead, people just correct them naturally, and they learn as they go. The same should be true for English learners.
Exactly. And another thing that holds people back is translating too much in their heads before they speak. When you always try to translate from your first language, it slows you down, and sometimes the sentence structure doesn't even work in English.
That's a great point. Instead of translating, it's better to start thinking in English. Even if you start with simple sentences, like, "I need to buy milk," or "Tomorrow is Monday." That's already progress. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes.
Right. And one way to practice thinking in English is to describe things around you in English. If you're walking outside, try saying in your head, "The sky is blue, that building is tall." A woman is walking her dog. It's a simple exercise, but it really helps train your brain.
Oh, I love that. And another tip is to talk to yourself in English. I know it sounds funny, but it works. You can just say what you're doing, like, "I'm making coffee. I need to find my keys." It helps you practice without pressure.
Definitely. And if you want even more practice, recording yourself speaking is a great way to improve. When you listen to yourself, you can hear what sounds natural and what needs work.
Yes, and don't forget, fluency is not just about speaking. Listening is just as important. A lot of learners struggle to understand native speakers because they speak fast or use contractions like "gonna" instead of "going to." But the more you listen to real English, the easier it gets.
So true. And that's why watching movies or TV shows in English is such a great way to improve. You hear real conversations, natural pronunciation, and new vocabulary in context.
Yes, and if movies feel too difficult, start with YouTube videos, podcasts, or even audiobooks for kids. The key is to listen every day, even for just a few minutes.
Exactly. And one last thing, don't be afraid to have conversations, even if your English isn't perfect. The more you speak, the more confident you become. Even small conversations, like ordering coffee in English or asking for directions, can help you improve so much.
Yes, the biggest secret to learning English is simple. Just keep going. Don't wait until you feel ready or perfect, because that day might never come. Just start speaking, keep listening, and trust that every little step brings you closer to fluency.
That's it. Learning English is not about being perfect, it's about making progress, step by step. If you keep practicing, keep listening, and keep speaking, you'll improve before you know it.
Absolutely. And remember, confidence is just as important as skill. If you believe in yourself and keep trying, fluency will come naturally.
Right, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is a lesson, and every lesson makes you better.
Yes. So, to everyone listening, keep going, keep practicing, and most importantly, enjoy the journey. Learning a language should be fun, not stressful.
We believe in you. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye for now, and happy learning.
Bye.